So Joseph, as he decides that he is going to be a candidate, he creates a platform.
He was a man ahead of his time.
Abolishing slavery, a national bank.
He is a fan of the Native Americans.
Reducing congressional pay.
So flyers were made, the campaign goes forward, and much to my surprise, Sidney Rigdon is the vice president.
They saw a combining together of both religious and political elements.
He came to Joseph and confessed that he had committed adultery.
New revelations, we've got baptism for the dead. There is so much going on in Nauvoo.
Joseph shares one of the most theologically profound sermons.
It gets the name of the King Folltette sermon.
This just blows away the ideas of creation ex nihilo.
He is openly advocating for violence.
Mr. Jackson being paid now $500 to kill Joseph.
Joseph calls out the militia.
It's not until about midnight that they actually arrive in Carthage. Blackened faces, torches.
And make their way up to the jailer's bedroom.
A bullet goes through the door and hits Hyrum first. Joseph goes to his brother and is shot. Hello, welcome back to Scripture Central. I'm Lynne Hilton Wilson here to talk about sections 135 and 136. We're in the Martyrdom of Joseph Smith. We're in 1844, and we are so lucky to be able to have the wonderful and brilliant Janiece Johnson. Welcome.
Thanks, Lynn. It's good to be here.
Oh, it's so good to have you as we go through this few minutes together, that we can give some historical background as to why he ran for president and who the Council of 50 were and what the printing press was all about. But let's start, first of all, with a timeline, just to put things in perspective. By December of 1843, Joseph had asked 5 of the presidential nominees if they would protect the saints. I think 3 of them write back. We'll get more detail on that later. But by December 28th, Joseph has prophesied that they have a Judas in their midst and that he is going to be betrayed. Starting in 1844, though, in early January, on the 8th, William Law is removed from the first presidency, and his brother, Wilson Law, is also excommunicated. By the end of January, though, by the 29th, Willard Richard nominates Joseph as candidate for U.S. president. A few weeks later, an anti-Mormon meetings begin in Carthage and in Warsaw, and they really see that Joseph is gaining too much power here. By February 20th, Joseph has called a delegation to look for a new gathering place because of all this anti-attacks again rising and fearing for the safety of the saints. By March 11th, Joseph organizes a Council of 50. It's a political adjunct to the church to help with his the political arm, but not just his running for president. It's also to prepare the world for the second coming of the Lord. By nearing the end of March 26th, Joseph gives his last charge, a message to the Council of 50. And at that meeting is where he uses the phrase to the 12, many of whom were there, that the priesthood keys of the apostolic quorum would be rolled off his shoulders. Then for General Conference, April 6th and 7th, he warns about apostates, he gives prophecy, and we have his most famous sermon in Nauvoo, the King Folltette Discourse, the funeral message for his dear friend, Brother Folltette. By April 18th, we have 337 missionaries who are going to go out and talk about the election. At the same time, we have the Warsaw Signal, which is an anti-diatribe that is beginning. And by the 21st of April, William and Jane Law have formed their own church with the goal to murder the Smiths. The Nauvoo Expositor is published in early June 7th. There's 1,000 copies. The city council discusses how it is a public nuisance and what they should do. And by the end of June, on the 27th of June, our prophet has been assassinated or martyred. And that only is giving the background of Joseph's death. That's not giving the background of building this Nauvoo temple that was underlining all of this, and then the challenges and the tensions of the plural marriage in the homes. But the Nauvoo temple had such an important impact on the community. Everyone is taking a day off to do this. And whenever the rocks and the stones are coming up from the quarry, everybody gathered in the streets and sang songs as they went up the hill. I mean, this was a very involved community in this temple building.
And it's hard. I mean, I think that when we visit Nauvoo, it's all these cute little brick buildings. And today the temple is there. The first time I went to
it wasn't
Nauvoo,
there when I went either.
But I think it's important for us to recognize that is most of those homes they lived in for a very short period of time. The temple wasn't completed. They were still in the middle of that in 1844. It was maybe just at the treetops at the time of the martyrdom. But all of these things are going on. And Joseph, we've got new revelations. We've got baptism for the dead. There is so much going on in Nauvoo. But building the temple is central to that. And then we get this election. This 1844 election.
And Joseph had gone back to Washington, D.C. in 1839 in obedience to the Lord's commandment to seek federal redress. And, of course, President Martin Van Buren was more empowered by the states than the federal government, did not see that as an option, felt like his hands were tied. Joseph felt completely betrayed by the government. And so now there's a chance for a new one. And in this election, we have 5 major candidates. Their names you may recognize if you're an American historian. If you're not, maybe not. But John Calhoun, Lewis Case, Richard Johnson, Henry Clay, and Martin Van Buren were all contacted by the prophet's secretaries, and 3 responded. I want to just read Henry Clay's. Should I be a candidate, I can enter into no engagements, make no promises, give no pledge to any particular portion of the people of the United States. If I ever enter into that high office, I must go into it free and unfettered, with no guarantees but such as are to be drawn from my whole life, character, and conduct. Well, one thing's for sure. I admire that answer, and we have gone a long way from that perspective in our current political situation, which is difficult. But because no one stood up to protect the people, the saints. I don't think Joseph was as worried about his own life as he was the people. You know, he had problems in Missouri, and they were half the size. You know, they're growing so quickly, especially as the British saints are coming in.
So Joseph, as he decides that he is going to be a candidate, and we have lots of different opinions on whether this was a sort of protest candidacy, but it does seem that there are some people who think that this is that there is enough chaos that Joseph Smith actually has a chance, that something could happen, but he creates a platform.
I love it.
Yeah.
When I've studied it, I thought he was a man ahead of his time.
Yeah. Abolishing slavery, and he's going to pay, by selling lands, he's going to pay slave owners so that they're not completely wiped out of resources. We've got prison reform, which shouldn't surprise us because Joseph spent some time in prisons. A national bank, reducing congressional pay, reducing the size of the House of Representatives, annexing Oregon and Texas, and extending the United States from the east to the West Sea.
Yeah, if Oregon was a larger area than it is now,
yeah.
You know, he's talking about a huge expanse there.
And
if there's one condition, though,
if the indigenous peoples give consent.
Yeah.
So
he is a fan of the Native Americans, and he has always been a proponent of them. That's why the first missionaries went down to Missouri, was to do that. The early missionaries went down to Missouri.
Yeah. So we've got this. He's got a platform. They're ready to, all sorts of missionaries that are ready to go out and preach for their candidate.
even if we just look at the one issue of freeing slavery, there's a lot of diversity in the nation. And we have such extremes that you really see Joseph saying, I am not an abolitionist to the extent that I will go to this source of violence to enforce this, but I want to peacefully find a solution. And I see his platform here, as a great example of where he stood on slavery. They printed 1,500 copies of this for these volunteers to take out and spread the word. And it's interesting that Joseph doesn't go out. That was not the practice. Politics were not as saturated as they are now.
Yeah.
He sends out other people, and he stays home and tries to get some work done.
Yeah. And there's a lot to do.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on.
But when I went back and looked at the 19th century cartoons, I just love looking at these. Joseph's name is not listed in most of them. They're the 5 major candidates.
Yeah. So we also have the Council of the 50 going on. During this period, the Council of 50 is formed. They are mostly Latter-day Saints, but not all Latter-day Saints. We have some non-members who are part of the Council of 50. And the Council of 50, just to speak historiographically, is really one of those fascinating things, because for a long time, people talked about the Council of 50 and all sorts of kind of wild speculation about what happened in the Council of 50. And one of the things that has come out of the Joseph Smith papers is publishing those minutes from the Council of 50. And there really are lots of interesting things. But the kind of meteoric speculation that had been made about the Council of 50 kind of comes crashing down to earth when we see kind of some of the general things that they're talking about. It's not kind of maybe as grandiose or as huge speculation as some people when we didn't have access to the minutes.
But one of the things the minutes say is that they saw it broader than running for president. They saw this as part of preparing for the second coming of the Lord. Mm-hmm. And as good Christians in that day and age, they went back to the Old Testament and they saw the prophecies of Daniel, and they wanted to build a kingdom as was described there in preparation for Christ's return.
Right. Yeah. And they really saw a theocracy. They saw a combining together of both religious and political elements in that vision of the kingdom being established.
So flyers were made, the campaign goes forward, and much to my surprise, Sidney Rigdon is the vice president. Now, initially, this person who lost became the vice president, but by now, a candidate is chosen, but the vice president was not allowed to be in the same state. And so Sidney leaves and goes to Pennsylvania. And I was quite shocked, actually, that he is the vice president candidate, because Joseph had already tried to remove himself from Sidney because their relationship was so difficult. Sidney has not been well mentally for years, and I think he's had problems for decades.
Well, and probably at least, I mean, his biographer tries to kind of make an assessment of his mental health, and I think that's tricky for historians to do.
Oh, yes.
But he was, since 1832, when Joseph and Sidney are mobbed, Sidney is in really bad shape, and he begins
to he's drunk by a horse on ice.
Yeah. And he begins to have really wild kind of mood swings. Mm-hmm. And Joseph the saints still love Sidney. Mm-hmm.
Very charismatic and dramatic speaker.
Yeah, but Joseph has kind of had it with Sidney.
Oh,
and he does seem very erratic in his actions. So it is interesting that he gets picked, but it also sends him away, and I guess Joseph doesn't have to deal with him being in Nauvoo. Yeah.
Joseph rose and gave a review of his life and sufferings and of the testimonies that he had borne, and said that the Lord had now accepted his labors and sacrifice and did not require him longer to carry the responsibilities and burdens of bearing this kingdom. Now, these are written down in people's journals that were at this meeting, but in the presence of the 12 and others, he said, according to this record that was written down, In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, I now place it upon my brethren of this council, and I shake my skirts clear of the responsibility of this time forth. Now, Joseph had given other messages saying, I no longer want to have to do this, and I'm going to give responsibility to different people. But in the scriptures, it says it's the 12. Unfortunately, also at this same time, we mentioned in the timeline that there is a lot of antagonism growing, and first and foremost are the Law brothers. I just want to set a little background here on what made William Law so angry at Joseph. As his first counselor, he came to Joseph and confessed that he had committed adultery, but that he was sorry he had, and he loved his wife, and he wanted to be sealed to her like all the other apostles and church leaders were being sealed. And Joseph said, hold on. If you've committed adultery, we need to step back and look at the repentance process and see what you've done and how your wife feels about this. And William Law was so angry that he left. And it was out of this environment that I feel, he lost the Spirit of the Lord, and the anger opened up the doorway for adversarial thoughts, and he became a tool of the adversary. And Charles Foster and Francis Higbee and Chauncey Higbee and John Bennett. John Bennett was the scoundrel back in 1842 who was our wolf in sheep's clothing we talked about previously. You know, these people who had worked with Joseph, who had lost their faith, came together and became a dangerous group.
Lucy records, or later as she's dictating her history, talks about some of the situations that happened during this time. Joseph Jackson asks Hyrum for his daughter Lavina, for he wished to make a wife of her. Hyrum, not choosing to have his daughter marry a man who did not belong to the church, refused for this and other reasons to give her to him. Jackson then asked Joseph to get his influence with Hyrum to get the girl for him. Joseph refusing to do so, so Jackson went to law to get his assistance in stealing Lavina from her father, Hyrum. The Higbees, Laws, and Fosters were all connected with Jackson in his operations.
Now, this is sort of a silly little story about a love triangle that Lucy includes about her granddaughter, and yet we find this challenge of Mr. Jackson being paid now by William Law to $500 to kill Joseph, and it's because I have these two sources, I decided to include that. This is all part of the animosity that was growing up, leading up to this beautiful general conference session where we hear one of the greatest sermons. And one of the things that the apostates were saying against Joseph was, he is no longer a prophet. He is a fallen prophet. So when Joseph stands to give his conference report, Sidney has come in for conference. He says, I am going to prophesy, and I am going to share things with you that are from God, but I'll first allow Sidney to speak. And Sidney gets up there and in his normal fashion speaks for hours and goes back and remembers all the good old days. And Joseph then stands up in the afternoon and shares one of the most theologically profound sermons, but the details in it are all based on the scriptures that he has already received. He's just putting the puzzle together on the nature of God and the nature of man in that relationship.
It gets the name of the King Follett sermon, but he never really actually gives a eulogy for his friend King. And King, I think, it's helpful for us to recognize that King was actually his name. And in the new American Republic, you had people calling their children king. We're not being subjected. We refuse kings. We've been refusing kings since 1776. And so now we're just going to call our kid King. So this is his first name. But we don't actually get a eulogy, but we get what becomes the pinnacle of Joseph's sermons. We only have it. We have 4 different scribes who are writing it down. So we have separate notes from those 4 different scribes.
And now it's all available on the Joseph Smith papers online.
Yeah, we can look at Wilford Woodruff is fantastic in his writing, but he's writing on the back of his hat. We haven't had any English converts who know Pitman shorthand yet, so we don't have shorthand, but they're all taking notes of this really exceptional talk, which again is not entirely revealing new things, but is putting together these revelations that Joseph has received over time in a new way, a way that feels very new to the saints.
And it answers that attack against Joseph that he is no longer giving revelation as fast.
I think it's Joseph Fielding writes in his journal that the apostates must have known that Joseph was still a prophet. That, that he is demonstrating to them that I am still a prophet, I am still receiving revelations. And for Joseph Fielding, at least, he couldn't see how anyone could have heard this talk, this sermon, and not still acknowledged that Joseph was a prophet.
This is from Wilford Woodruff's journal, where he's quoting Joseph. I want you to understand God and how he comes to be God. We suppose that God was God from eternity. I will take away the veil so that you may see. It is the first principle to know that we may converse with him and that he once was man like us and the Father was once on an earth like this. Well, this just blows away the ideas of creation ex nihilo, and the premortal existence fits now, and the role of women as a parallel priest and priestess and king and queen all fits. I mean, these things he's talked about before just link in together. Here's Thomas Bullock's handwriting, if you have a chance to look at our slides here. And he writes down that Joseph said, I have intended my remarks to all, to the rich and poor, bond and free, great and small. I have no enmity against man. And continues on a little bit later, for I love all men, especially these, my brethren and sisters. You never knew my heart. No man knows my history. And we take that out of context and get it completely construed differently. But he goes on, I cannot do it, or I never should undertake, if I had not experienced what I've had, what I should not have known it myself. I never did harm to any man since I have been born in the world. My voice is always for peace. I cannot lie down until my work is finished. But I still think Joseph is having premonitions that his work is nearing. So let's move on to the martyrdom.
Yeah. Well, and for the last decade or so, Joseph has been, we get little inklings that Joseph knows perhaps that his time is
cutting short. Yeah. So by May, he's called again. The Carthage conspiracies are growing, and they've taken a page out of the old Missouri text, and they're learning how they can imprison and hopefully this time martyr the prophet. But we're very fortunate to once again have his mother's records. Do you want to tell us a little bit about
Lucy? Lucy, she's going to dictate this shortly after her sons have died. But she says, the apostates gather strength until finally they established a printing press in our midst. Through this organ, they belched forth. I love the imagery of belching forth the most intolerable and the blackest lies that was ever palmed upon a community. Yeah. And interestingly, the Nauvoo Expositor, a lot of it rotates around polygamy, which was one of those things that William Law could not, and Jane. We often don't focus, but Jane seems to have a very active role in this, in publishing the newspaper. But polygamy is one of those things that they cannot abide.
Which is so ironic, coming from his confession as an adulterer. Yeah. But not throwing stones at them, I just want to explain a little bit about the historical background here. We do not have the Bill of Rights in each state at this point. This is made as a federal statement. And so as a 21st century, I say, how could the city council even consider destroying a press with freedom of the press so clearly outlined in our Bill of Rights? Well, that was not the case in 1844. the states did not have the same as the federal. We did not accept all these things. And there were many printing presses
examples
destroyed, including archaeological evidence of finding them in the Mississippi River. They found many in the Mississippi River, knowing that they had been destroyed by people who disagreed with what was written.
And even with that, this is not an easy decision.
I understand the city council mentioned for days
coming down with a fiat that says, we're destroying it because it says something. I mean, the Warsaw Signal Thomas Sharp has been saying stuff that presenting Joseph in a
negative manner
for a long time.
I think it was shortly after the dedication, the groundbreaking of the temple is when we started getting some animosity coming out of Mr. Sharp's paper. And they don't destroy that one. That's a good point.
Yeah.
And so the city council deliberates for 3 days.
For a long time, 14 hours, I think, over those 3 days. And they decide, the final decision that they make is that it is a public nuisance.
And because of that, they then have the right to stop it.
Yeah, yeah.
But they don't want to do it as a riot. They want to do it in an orderly manner, which is just hilarious to me that they consider destroying something orderly. But this is how we're stepping back into 19th century history. Do not look at this from the lens of an American now.
Yeah. Yeah, but they remove the press. They burn the papers.
The city marshal is...
They had started a second edition
that was burned.
Yeah. And at this point, Thomas Sharp is on the offensive. He is openly advocating for violence at this point. War and extermination is inevitable. We have no time for comment. Every man will make his own. Let it be made with powder and ball. We sometimes go back and forth about whether something was meant to be metaphorical or literal, but this is very clear that he is advocating for violence against the Latter-day Saints, but specifically against Joseph.
And so the community says, we are going to take the entire city council and put him in, take him to court on this one, not just Joseph. But the city council goes in. But on June 13th, the Nauvoo Municipal Court releases Joseph on the writ of habeas corpus because he was charged with riot, which was not substantiated. But on June 14th, following their release, acting as the mayor and the judge, Joseph clears all the others who were charged in Nauvoo. But this mix of religion and executive judicial power really infuriated the members of the church. And so just a couple days later, on June 17th, Joseph and others are again trying to keep peace, say, all right, you can try us in a non-LDS justice of the peace. Take us outside of Nauvoo.
Yeah.
And then the non-member, Daniel Weld, steps in and also discharges them and says there was no rioting. It was done in a manner that was acceptable in that day and age, which is quite shocking to me. But that's what they said.
Joseph calls out the militia on June 18th to protect the city
from the mobs. And our pictures always depict him as the Napoleon or as the Alexander the Great, he's the conqueror. I want to just emphasize he's trying to protect the city. He's trying to protect the women and children. And I understand that many people came in from the outskirts because there were some skirmishes going on outside of Nauvoo. And we have saints spread all over this community. It's not just inside the city. They're on both sides of the Mississippi as well as 10, 15, 20 miles away. They've still got their farms out there.
Yeah. And this painting, John Hafen did this painting, but... Of course, it's done after the fact. This is not contemporary.
The Nauvoo Temple
was not finished during Joseph's. But also, I think that it gives us maybe an errant depiction of, the Nauvoo Legion had uniforms, but this was a little more ragtag than crisp than what we have kind of depiction. Yeah. This is a it's a hopeful depiction.
Yes.
And clearly Joseph did not have that standing army to protect him.
No. But the governor becomes involved. And remember, the population in our county is the largest population in the state.
In the whole state.
So,
Yeah.
of course, the governor is concerned.
Yeah.
This is very important. So,
Nauvoo is bigger than Chicago at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least the county size.
Yeah.
So by June 18th, Governor Ford writes to tell Joseph that he has got to face charges. And by June 22nd, the Governor Ford writes back to tell Joseph that he must appear in court at the very hostile community of Carthage. And because of Mr. Sharp, because of the efforts of the Higbees and the Laws and others, this was almost going back to Jackson County, Missouri. Not quite, but almost. And so early Sunday morning, June 23rd, Joseph, in a little boat with his good friend Orrin Porter Rockwell and Willard Richards, go across the Mississippi. And I guess their boat's leaking. They're using their boots to shovel out water, one rows. But anyway, they get over with the Iowa Saints on the other side, and they attempt to meet with some attorneys. A new biography on this period comes in Volume 2 of A Life Lived in Crescendo on Joseph. And we've got some great legal cases here and articles if you'd like to look into it more. And all of this will be on my handout attached to this. But we're told that morning, Joseph then gets letters back from some of the saints, and Emma is recording. And somewhere in someone's statement is where Joseph felt he was being called a coward.
We don't know the specifics of this, but he decides to return.
Yeah.
And decides that, okay, I'm going to submit myself to the process.
Yeah. But that evening, as Joseph returns to Nauvoo Sunday night, he is able to give blessings to his children, and they are very young. Their wonderful adopted Julia is 13 now. Joseph III is 11. We have an 8, 6, and 4-year-old. Emma has lost another pregnancy or two and is expecting David Hyrum, who will be born in November. But that night, he is able to spend some time with his family. And also that next day, Hyrum is able to marry his daughter. This crazy love triangle that we talked about earlier, she has been able to marry the man that she did want to marry, and that's turning out well for them that they were there. But as they are preparing to then go with Governor Ford, Emma has seen her husband in dangerous situations over and over again, calls and says, "You are coming back." And it is recorded that Joseph said, "I am going like a lamb to the slaughter, yet I have a conscience void of offense toward God and man." But that morning at 6:30 in the morning, the
next morning they leave.
They leave, and he's escorted by Governor Ford's team, and they start heading down to Carthage. But on the way, Joseph finds out that they are, the governor is going to ask the people of Nauvoo to completely give up all of their weapons. And in a day and age where that was absolutely every home had something, Joseph knew that the saints would not obey that coming from the governor unless he asked for it. So they turn around, he goes back to Nauvoo, and he enforces this disarmament. That's June 24th, and it makes that day, that hot, muggy, sweltering ride of 23 miles.
June in Nauvoo is horrible.
Oh, yeah. And it makes it even longer. And this is where it's been claimed that he said, "Boys, if I don't come back, take care of yourselves," as he releases the legion. And according to saints, this is when Emma asks for a blessing. And do you want to talk about that? What have you learned on that, Janiece?
He doesn't have an opportunity to give her a blessing, and he tells her that she should write it down.
And I feel like this is one of the most precious things to see inside Emma's heart in 1844, with all that's going on.
All that has passed, all that has transpired.
And to see her purity and her righteous desires. It's a different time and culture. She says things that I wouldn't say, but I love this Emma.
Yeah. She says, I desire the Spirit of God to know and understand myself. I desire a fruitful, active mind that I may be able to comprehend the designs of God, wisdom to raise my children. I desire with all my heart to honor and respect my husband, ever to live in his confidence, and by acting in unison with him, retain the place which God has given me by his side. Thinking about that in the context of polygamy and everything that they have gone through together, I think it's just a really beautiful wish that she has.
Me too.
I desire that whatever may be my lot through life, I may be enabled to acknowledge the hand of God in all things.
I love that. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It's not until about midnight that they actually arrive in Carthage. And I understand there's a whole mob there that wants to see them. And the governor says, I'll parade them in the morning. We are getting them to bed. We are absolutely exhausted. And so these 17 friends, as well as the city council, everyone is there and waiting for Tuesday morning. And they get a few hours of sleep, we hope. And in order to protect the prisoners, the governor promises them more protection, and that's when they move into Carthage Jail.
The Carthage Jail is supposed to be to protect them.
Fortunately, that Tuesday, though, the city council is freed on bail. Mm-hmm. And actually, Joseph would have been, but they come right back and give another charge against him. And this time, because now he's been called to treason, there's no bail. There's no way of getting out of it. It's just like it was back in Missouri. Joseph is now in full position where the governor has promised to protect him, but the governor has another desire, and he does not follow through with that promise at all. But let's just talk about Carthage Jail for a minute. If you've ever had a chance to go there, you've been able to see that these walls are 2.5 feet thick. But even if you haven't, you can go online now, and they walk you through these things. There's 3 different floors, and the dungeon is the darkest downstairs. The debtor's cell then, where the 10 men slept. But they have breakfast together. There's a nice bedroom upstairs. There is actually places where there's in bars. The jailer and his wife and 7 children, though, are living downstairs. I think, wow, what a place to live with your children. But the men actually slept in the debtor's cell. And as they go through this, Governor Ford meets with the prisoners and promises that he's going to escort them back to Nauvoo. So Joseph writes a letter on June 26th and says, don't worry, Emma. The governor has given me his promise. I'm going to be protected. And that afternoon, when Joseph's called to court, the governor's still there. We have different people who are still protecting him as they go to court, but all of that changes when the governor goes against his word and leaves. And the only people he keeps in this city are a few Carthage Greys who have a very good reputation of being very against the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So their second night in prison, Dan Jones chooses to stay with the prophet. He doesn't have to. And they are having a hard time sleeping. I'm sure it's absolutely sweltering. Joseph gives his arm to Brother John Fulmer to sleep on. And as he's talking to Brother Dan Jones, Joseph says, are you ready to die? And he gives a prophecy. And Dan Jones says that this meant so much to him. It was one of the strongest spiritual experiences he had in his life. And I think it's because it prepared the way for one of his future greatest blessings, which was his phenomenal missionary work in his mother country back in Great Britain. But the Lord prompts Joseph to tell Dan Jones, you will serve in Wales. And that comes to pass. And the next morning is June 27th.
Yeah. And Willard Richards and John Taylor are upstairs in the jailer's bedroom. Hyrum is reading aloud from the Book of Mormon. Joseph preaches to the guards. Hyrum sings. They sing a poor way. It's not called a poor wayfaring man of grief at that time, but it's a new hymn at that time. They sing it once, and then John Taylor, Hyrum asked John Taylor to sing it again.
And the story says, I don't feel much like singing.
Yeah. Dan will not stay in the jail. He will go.
But I just love the fact that they are spending their time, they're not just reading in the Book of Mormon, they were reading the sections on when the prisoners were miraculously delivered from prison. And they're having great faith. We have 2 apostles and members of the First Presidency there. This is a group of great faith. And Joseph may have had promptings and premonitions, but he's still trust in the Lord's timing. He doesn't have a clear picture. The veil is still drawn.
Yeah.
And they are doing things to foster the Spirit, singing hymns, reading scriptures when they hear the mob gathering that afternoon.
And we've got the Carthage Greys don't protect them.
No, in fact, they don't even have bullets in their guns. From what they've been able to figure out, they just had a little sound and nothing more than that. And there's just a handful of them. And this huge mob comes, blackened faces, torches, heavy ammunition, and take over the jail.
And make their way up to the jailer's bedroom.
And they first think that Joseph the men are still in the barred part. And so they go up there, and the first shots are fired there. But then they realize that they are not in that room, and they come down. And it's 150, 200 people who are there. Someone had smuggled in a gun. And the Joseph actually fires back at that time, but it misfires. It doesn't do anything. And I guess because they were at the door, a bullet goes through the door and hits Hyrum first, right behind his skull. And Hyrum takes 2 or 3 other. He's running to the end of the window when he falls, and Joseph goes to his brother and is shot there. He also goes to the window, and by that time, the men standing at the door aren't able to do anything. And I think John Taylor receives multiple, one in his wrist, one in his chest, and one in his leg. And he's just pushed under the bed. But the amazing thing is the largest man in the room, Willard Richards, had a prophecy given by Joseph that said, you will be in a volley of bullets. And your clothing will not be hit. But his earlobe was hit, but not his clothing.
Yeah. Willard is the only one who makes it out. And he really, saved John Taylor's life by pulling a straw mattress over him
to stop the bleeding.
Yeah.
And as a nurse, I just thought that was, he can pass out, but stop that bleeding. I was so grateful that coagulation was able to come from that.
Yeah. When we've got John Taylor's watch, which would give us about the time, there was speculation. There was speculation for a long time that it was a bullet. But a bullet, think about these bullets are balls. They would have eradicated this watch had it hit them. But the watch was probably broken as he was shot and hit the windowsill. That it was broken. I think Truman Madsen is the one who suggested that Joseph jumped from the window. But those are very deep windowsills. It would have taken a lot to push him out the window without him trying to. But he...
Or the force of the bullet, too, with all of that. But you're right. The 2.5-foot window would suggest that.
Those window wells are very deep.
And the records say that he did call out, "Oh Lord, my God," as he went to his death. But supposedly 35 bullet shots have been found in the rooms. But Joseph, of course, when he lands, tries to get himself propped up a little bit by the well and then dies there on this side of the jail. And someone calls out, "The Mormons are coming."
Yeah.
And that dispersed the mob.
Joseph was dead.
Yeah.
And they brought him and Hyrum back in the wagons.
It's amazing to me that Samuel was trying to get to the prison to be with his brothers. Samuel had no idea that he would be the first one there to put the bodies in the wagon. And they, of course, in the heat and the way it worked, it was difficult. But Samuel is able to take his brothers back up to Nauvoo. They put down different kinds of skins and leaves and branches to kind of keep out some of the sweltering heat from the decomposition.
Mm-hmm.
But John Taylor is saved by Willard Richards' continued efforts, taking over to a hotel room. And supposedly the doctor who came to cut out some of the balls in his hand and his side said, "You have nerves of steel." And anyway, he is still so ill that for days he cannot move, as he has lost so much of his life. But by the time the wagon comes back and Emma and Lucy and the other saints learn that Joseph and Hyrum have gone, they begin having a viewing in the mansion house. And at first, Mary Fielding comes in to see Hyrum, and Emma faints. She's expecting.
Mm-hmm.
Her body is carrying all the emotions as well as another child, and it's very, very difficult. She is able to wait a while and come back in and have some time with Joseph before the saints start making their viewing. But it's not until June 29th. So they have been passed for a day and a half when the saints begin. And it says they just made a line for hours and hours all day as they came past the bodies of our dear beloved prophets.
Yeah. One last note. In section 135, we have this beautiful tribute to Joseph and to Hyrum also, but to Joseph the prophet. And for a long time, we assumed that John Taylor, if you have old scriptures, like I have old scriptures, they right here, they still say written by John Taylor. But we now know that John Taylor was not. This was written before John Taylor was actually back in Nauvoo and ready. Probably most of it was written by Willard Richards. But this beautiful tribute to the prophet of the Restoration, that Joseph has done more save Jesus
only for the salvation of men in this world
than anyone, and talking about those achievements, and really thinking about what Joseph did to not only help us to understand who we are as we stand before God, but to better know who God is, and who our Savior is. And anyway, I love this tribute. It's very flowery. It feels like the 19th century, but Joseph was the prophet of our dispensation and ushered in this beautiful restoration that we still get to participate in.
And it's because of that great work and because of God's influence through not only Joseph, but God's influence through the prophets, seers, and revelators since then, and his influence in every believing heart who prays and earnestly seeks to follow the prophets of God, to learn that we are here to prepare the world for the second coming. And the whole gathering of Israel, the whole purpose of all this is to prepare a people, a Zion society, so that we can stop the calamities of the last days and welcome our Savior to rule and reign in righteousness. Praise to the man who communes with Jehovah, and not just Joseph, but every saint who receives that witness. Thank you for putting forth the effort and the humility to do so. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.